Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to take a minute to just talk about the Tolarian Community College's idea for Pauper Event Decks, aka the professor was talking about his idea for Pauper Event Decks, and I just wanted to respond to that. Let me start out by just saying I have complete respect for the professor. I really appreciate him supporting the Pauper format, so just keep that in mind as I go through this. I disagree with the idea of Pauper Event Decks. I appreciate the professor's intent to try to help the Pauper format, but I do not believe Pauper Event Decks would help the Pauper format. Here's why. I think the product would flop. These Pauper Event Decks would not sell well. Most casual players out there do not want to go spend $25 for what they would view as a pile of commons. Don't misunderstand me. There's a lot of people who I think will be really into the Pauper format. There's a lot of people who are going to be into showing up and playing at tournaments for a Pauper event. But I think there's not a lot of people who are going to be interested in actually buying a supplemental product that's just, as a lot of casual players would view it, just a pile of commons. That's not really very interesting. I think most players would rather take their $20 to $30 and go buy a few boosters of a Masters set, have a chance at getting some sweet old mythics or cool rares, instead of, just getting a pile of commons. That's just not going to appeal. And when it doesn't appeal and it doesn't sell well, it's going to send the message to Wizards that, you know what, maybe Pauper's not that popular, maybe people aren't into this, and we should just get rid of it. You got to give Pauper the right kind of support. A lot of people talk about supplemental products, they talk about having a special set for commons only, supplemental decks, whatever. These are all not good ideas, respectfully, to everyone who's talked about this. What the format needs is one thing and one thing only, and that is to be sanctioned as a legitimate format, because that will allow more stores to hold Pauper tournaments and feel comfortable about it, because players won't show up and play in a tournament and then complain, hey, I didn't get my Planeswalker points, or whatever the case may be. This would also open up the higher probabilities of Star City Games having a larger Pauper tournament, not just as a side event. It would open up the possibility to actually having a Pauper Grand Prix. But the first and only thing that Pauper needs is to be sanctioned by WotC. There's not really a need for any supplemental products because they're all commons. And this also would hurt stores, because right now there's a ton of stores out there that have all kinds of bulk and commons and things that, as these stores begin to discover that they could sell these commons, could make a lot of money. And if you kill the value of all those commons that these stores have, then you're not really helping the store's bottom line nearly as much. It would be much more profitable for stores to actually build their own decks, as the professor even references to how Channel Fireball should be going into their warehouses of bulk, putting together some Pauper decks and having those things ready to go at events to sell for people at their basically their retail pricing all put together. And these stores would make tons of money off of this. Maybe not tons of money, but the profit margins would be fabulous, because most of this stuff has a nearly zero cost basis. Basically, when these stores buy collections, they're paying for the good stuff, and the bulk they just kind of pick up for pennies on the dollar, fractions of pennies on the dollar. So if some of these commons suddenly they could sell for 50 cents a dollar, $2, $3, $4, it's really a windfall for stores. And a lot of LGS, a lot of local game shops really could use a windfall. It's not been exactly the best of times for stores with master sets being sold at Walmart now. The other thing is, stores could even innovate. They could have some kind of a combined format. Like, let's say there needs to be a real budget format. So Frontier Pauper, only the newer commons. I mean, my goodness, you would be able to assemble decks, any deck in the format, for like $10. Stores could hold some kind of a special tournament like that, where they put together a bunch of decks and just tell people, hey, you can pick up a deck for $10 and then enter the tournament for $10. The whole thing's covered for like 20. Pretty close to the cost of a draft, only you actually get to play in a constructed event. And then it would also leave room for brewing, because it would be a totally undefined format. So people who don't care about Pauper but they love brewing, well, they'd be like, oh man, I need to get in on this Frontier Pauper action. You can't go to the internet and just get a deck list. Oh man, I love it. I want to be able to brew. And of course, eventually there would be deck lists and metagame and everything, and so the brewers would get kind of annoyed or bored. But there's a lot of options for stores to be able to sell a lot of product. And basically what it boils down to is, if Wizards creates these supplemental products, Wizards gets a bigger chunk of the money, and all those extra common old cards that these stores have laying around, if Wizards reprints them just as they're starting to become worth something, that also once again chops these game stores off at the knees. Going back to the first and most important point, the biggest reason though isn't just because it really wouldn't help stores and it would probably do more harm than good there. The big thing is this will not help Pauper. It would most likely hurt because these decks just will not sell well. There's not broad appeal as far as Pauper goes. It's a very specific community. And because it's a specific community, it needs the right kind of support. It's very interesting. I believe you could put a lot of different Pauper supplemental products out there and they would not sell well at all. However, if Pauper just became a sanctioned format, I believe it would have a continuous and steady following at events where you would see a lot of Pauper players show up to play in tournaments. And that's very different. Not every player is going to be interested in buying certain supplemental products, and not every player is going to be interested in going to tournaments. Some players want to do both, but consider this. How many of the Star City Games tournament grinders do you think are lining up immediately to buy like Challenger and Dual decks? Probably none of them, right? There's a whole lot of competitive players out there who have zero interest in supplemental products. There's also a lot of people who aren't interested in competitive play that really like supplemental products. And yes, Pauper has great casual appeal for people who aren't interested in tournaments, but the heart and soul of Pauper, the reason it's taken off online is because it's a tournament format that you can play on a relative budget. That's the whole key. So there just needs to be sanctioning. The only kind of supplemental product I'm going to talk about where it would actually make sense for everybody is just for Wizards to become aware of Pauper, sanction it, and then realize it's a format that occasionally needs to be thrown a bone through the Masters series of products. If you ever listen to people who have YouTube channels like Rudy, who has Alpha Investments, you can go check that out sometime. He likes to talk about occasionally how when he does a massive box opening, he doesn't make his money on the big cards. He says he has to sell all the expensive cards to get to break even, and it is the commons and the uncommons with value. That's where he says he makes his money. So that would be, a great way to again throw a bone to stores and players like Rudy, while also throwing a bone to Pauper players by intentionally putting in Pauper cards that might need to see a reprint into those Masters series of products. It would help the stores that do mass box openings, help their profit margins. It would get Pauper players the cards that they need. It would happen more slowly, where if you have a Pauper deck and there's a few cards that get reprinted in a new Masters set, it won't tank the value of all your Pauper decks. It'll, some of your Pauper cards will be worth less, but it's not just going to nuke the whole value of one of the decks you have because the deck was fully reprinted. So it's also kind of more insulating for Pauper players' decks, because let's face it, some of these Pauper decks are going to go up a little bit. I don't think any of these Pauper decks are ever going to go over 200. Most of them will never get over 150. It's possible that we'll have a lot of Pauper decks that never get over $100. But for those players that put $60 in a deck and it goes up to 80, these being budget-minded players, that's very cool for them. That's a good thing for those people. And so, just completely nuking the value of some of these players' decks, I don't know if that's really great. So this is just one of those things where basically I think the best thing that we could see Wizards do is just offer some support to the format by sanctioning it, and then other than just having the sanctioning, maybe be more intentional about reprinting cards that Pauper needs in master sets. That would also be good for Wizards because it would add some extra EV to those sets, and that's where Wizards makes a lot of its profits too, are on those Master Series products where they can charge more for them. So anyway, that's basically it. I really appreciate the professor. I think he's great. But on this one and other people who have been talking about standalone Pauper products, that's really not what Pauper needs. Pauper needs to be sanctioned and recognized, and that's pretty much it. Peace out, everybody.